Hello, I'm Professor Ira Sheskin. I'm a professor of geography and chair of the geography department at the University of Miami. And I've lived in South Florida now since 1977.
Welcome, Professor Sheskin. I'm Miriam Sano-O'Dowlin, a professor of history and Jewish studies at Florida Atlantic University here in Boca Raton, and an interviewer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. And this interview is being done for the Jewish Community Oral History Project. We are taping this interview on Wednesday, May 2nd, at the television studios at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. And we know that you're one of the most distinguished demographers in the country, and you've done many studies, especially about South Florida. Please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you came to do what you do.
Oh, I have a PhD in geography from Ohio State University, which is not really about what are the major products of France. Okay, we do the type of work that sociologists or economists or political scientists would do, but we emphasize, when it comes to people, issues of migration, where people live, how things vary from one place to another. So actually in graduate school, my major area of study was in transportation planning, but I learned how to do surveys, okay? And as a result of that, back in 1982, the Greater Miami Jewish Federation needed a study done of the Jewish population in Miami, and I bid on it. I was, 32 years old at the time, and they were excited about my level of enthusiasm, okay, was part of the reason they hired me. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've now done 52 major studies of this nature all over the country. And these studies today run anywhere from probably about $150,000 to upwards of $300,000, okay, in which we go into a community and do anywhere, depending on the community, from 600 to as many as 3,000 interviews by telephone with randomly selected Jewish households who are selected not from just from mailing lists of Jews, but also by simply dialing telephone numbers at random until you find someone who's Jewish. What makes South Palm Beach, and when I say South Palm Beach, I mean both Boca as well as Del Rey, unique among Jewish communities in the country, is that when you just dial random phone numbers in Boca Raton and Del Rey Beach, almost half the households you reach are Jewish. When you dial phone numbers at random in a place like Omaha, Nebraska, about 1% of households are Jewish, okay? So you can see it was one of the easiest surveys I've ever done was here in South Florida because almost every other person you talk to was Jewish, okay? Once you get them, you're doing about a 20-minute interview. And, everyone now watching this tape is going to say, I'd never stay on the phone for 20 minutes. Well, somehow or other in Palm Beach County, 3,000 people did that. And the reality is once we got people past about question 5, very few people hung up the phone on us, okay? Once people begin to see the importance of this type of information in planning for the Jewish community, they're very willing to donate their time.
So you found a qualitative difference between the responses in South Palm Beach County and the responses you got in studies elsewhere?
Oh, no, we do very well in getting good quality every place else. It's just that, because this area is so densely Jewish, mm-hmm. we run into a lot more Jews when you just dial a number at random, okay? When you're in a place like Cincinnati, let's say, or Columbus, Ohio, right? You could dial the phone for 4 hours before you find a Jewish household. Here, you can dial the phone for about maybe 10 minutes before someone says they're Jewish and they're willing to do the interview, okay?
So you came to Miami in 1977. I guess you got a position after...
I got a position at the University of Miami, right, and I've been there ever since.
And when you came to, and you've always lived in or around Miami?
Well, right now I live in Cooper City in South Broward, but I really have connections in all three counties. I've done 5 major studies now for the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, 3 in Broward, and 5 in Palm Beach County. And for over 20 years, my parents lived in a place called Palm Greens in Delray Beach. So when they lived here and basically lived in South County for 20-something years, you know, I learned a lot about this community, visiting them, going to the restaurants here. In South Palm Beach County, I've probably spoken over the years at 8 or 10 of the synagogues, presenting the results of you know, our profile of Jews in this area.
So you've seen it grow and develop.
Oh yeah, I mean, let's first talk about the current size of the Jewish population in
Yes.
South Florida. Then we'll go back to the growth and development.
Tell us
thing, okay?
why South Florida is so important as a Jewish population
Well,
center.
first, there are now about 700,000 Jews in the state of Florida, okay, making that the 3rd largest state Jewishly in the country.
What are the first
Okay.
two?
New York and California. Okay, in South Florida, the 3-county area, the Jewish
Could you
population.
name the 3 counties?
Oh yeah, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, and the total is 527,000 Jews
In the Tri-County
in the
area.
Tri-County area. Right now, Miami now has 113,000. Miami had been decreasing. At one point, Miami had 250,000, going back to the 1970s. And it's now down to 113,000. On the other hand, the good news in Miami, where we recently completed a study, is the Jewish population in Miami has begun a bit of a resurgence, mostly due to an influx of Hispanic Jews, Israelis, and Orthodox Jews with larger families. Okay, Broward has about 150,000 Jews today. That's down by more than 90,000. Okay, and Palm Beach County has 255,000 Jews, of whom 70,000 live in Boca Raton. Now, what's happened over the years in this 3-county area is, if you go back to, let's say, 1940, something like 95% of Jews in the Tri-County area lived in what was then called Dade County, right? Today it's Miami-Dade County. Gradually, right, Miami kept growing, but gradually Jews began to move to Broward. And the size of Broward's Jewish population by the 1970s was starting to exceed the size of Miami's Jewish population. Okay? Then by the 1980s, Jews started to move in larger numbers into Palm Beach County. Some of this growth was due to movement out of Miami into Broward and Palm Beach. Miami became a big city. Miami became a multicultural city. Retirees were very interested in moving into new housing developments where the percentage Jewish was quite high. That was an attraction for people to move to Palm Beach County. So we saw a lot of movement from Miami to Broward because people who continued to work in Miami, like myself, could move to Broward and still commute. Okay, much less so in Palm Beach County. Not very many people are going to move to Boca and continue to work, let's say, in downtown Miami or even North Miami Beach. It's quite a schlep from there. Okay, and so at one point, we measured 50,000 Jews in Broward who used to live in Miami. That was about 10 years after Hurricane Andrew hit Miami. And the last time we did surveys in Palm Beach County, we found about 10,000 Jews here who used to live in Miami or Broward. Okay? So most of the growth in Palm Beach County, which really began to take off in the 1980s, okay, most of that growth was direct movement from the Northeast, where the major states they were coming from, and not going to surprise anybody here, were New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, by the way, Midwestern Jews don't come to Miami. They do come to Miami, but a large percentage of Midwestern Jews end up in Tampa, St. Pete, Naples, Fort Myers on the west coast of Florida. Now, here's where being a geographer comes in. Okay, there's a reason for that. If you live in New York And let's say when your kids are young, you want to go down to Florida, right, for a vacation, you drive down I-95, or in the earlier days, US 1. Now, from New York, 95 takes you to the east coast of Florida. From Chicago, you get on 75, takes you to the west coast of Florida. Yeah. And so while the majority of Midwestern Jews are actually on the East Coast, the percentage of Jews on the west coast of Florida who are from the Midwest is much higher than the percentage is on the East Coast of Florida. Okay? So this is mostly, it's a New York population. I can remember when my aunt moved into Kings Point in Delray Beach. She belonged to the Bayside Club. These were for people in Kings Point who used to live in Bayside, Queens. Okay? And we see, actually, it mirrors in some ways the Landsmannschaften that we had in the Jewish community. Everybody from Belarus, my grandfather being one, which was then called Bessarabia, belonged to the Young Men's Bessarabian Society, right, which was a kind of a group help type of thing, right? And that's kind of, people followed their friends and relatives, sometimes to a condominium.
They had that in Century Village too. They
Right.
had the Brooklyn group and the
Right,
different neighborhood
yeah.
group. They even had the Emerald Club, which was for people who had greenhorns who had been born overseas.
Well, if you think about the elderly Jews who moved here in the 80s and the 90s, when they grew up in neighborhoods in New York that were probably 90% Jewish. Then they moved out to the suburbs where they interacted a lot with both Jews and non-Jews, right? And then as they grew older, they you kind of returned to what you knew when you were a kid. And that's what they were looking for, and that's what they found to a large extent in Boca Raton, as well as the rest of South Florida.
I've heard of the term resettlement. Is that something?
Yes,
that
that's a good term for it. Yes.
Would you repeat that word?
Resettlement.
What does that mean?
Well, Jews obviously in Eastern Europe lived in their own villages called shtetls, and that was actually, in a sense, enforced by the government, right? Jews were not allowed to live in lots of different places. So when Jews moved to South Florida and moved into mostly Jewish condominiums, okay, they were kind of reestablishing what their parents had when they were in Eastern Europe, okay? And it is interesting. I remember when my parents moved into Palm Greens, okay? I'm looking at the mailboxes. I said, "Mom, is everybody here Jewish?" She says, "Practically, yeah." And we pulled out their directory of all the Palm Beach County residents, and based on name, which still works, okay, there were, most out of 1,250 households, 50 that might not have been Jewish. Mm. And, after a while, some of the Jews, the non-Jews, he said, just felt uncomfortable. They didn't have as much in common with all the Jews who'd moved in, So I don't think there was any discrimination against the non-Jews, but people, particularly at that age, I think feel more comfortable with people who share a common heritage. And I think that was part of what created these largely Jewish condominiums that we see throughout Palm Beach County.
Mm-hmm. It's not just condominiums anymore. It's also gated communities with
single-family homes, right? And that's another thing to keep in mind. When you look at the Jews who settled, like Miami Beach, which was really the first major concentration of Jews, okay, in South Florida, you look at the Jews who settled on Miami Beach. They came from the garment workers in New York. They came from the teachers' unions. They were lower middle class. These were not wealthy people. And they were moving into relatively small apartments. They knew apartments in New York and Manhattan and Brooklyn and the Bronx, and they moved into apartments on Miami Beach. Well, then of course, when Broward and Palm Beach started to get settled with Jewish population, the people moving down at that point were not coming out of Brooklyn and Queens as much as they were coming out of suburban counties, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Greenwich, Connecticut, northern New Jersey. They'd grown up in single-family homes, and they were not interested as much in moving into high-rises, right? They wanted to continue a single-family home, or at most attached dwellings, but we had your own your own entrance. I know my mother said to me, when I said, why don't you move to a nice condo by the water, right? She says, I can't imagine schlepping groceries up 10 flights in an elevator anymore. I haven't done that for years. I'm used to driving my car into a driveway and bringing my groceries in. And so we've seen then a change, because the Jews moving particularly into Palm Beach County today are considerably more wealthy. They're not the union workers, they're the owners of the businesses, they're doctors, they're lawyers, right? And they're bringing those skills with them. And we're about to see another kind of major change in what's happening to the Jewish population, in that the 65 to 74 age bracket today is almost all made up of baby boomers. Now understand that if we look at South Florida as a whole, right, half the Jewish population is age 65 and over, right? 65 and over is about 14% of America today. It's half the Jewish population of South Florida. But the baby boomers in particular, right, are really coming out of the suburbs. Okay, they're not coming out of the cities as much. They are professionals. And not only that, they're not retiring so fast. We just finished a new study in Broward County. Go back 20 years in Broward, and 8% of the elderly were currently employed. Today, it's 24% of the elderly are currently employed.
How do you define elderly?
65 and over. Actually, since June 10th, 2 years ago, elderly is 75 and over. No, because that's when I turned 65, right? but the Census Bureau uses 65 and over, so that's what.
Which is not really old anymore.
Which is not really old anymore, right? Yeah. So in the report that I'm talking about now, all the results are presented separately for 65 to 74, and then for 75 and over. But looking at the 65 and overs, 1 out of 4 Jews age 65 and over today are continuing to work. That's triple the rate of 20 years ago. So the baby boomers were turning 65 and not retiring so fast. And that's because 65 is not that old anymore. And people are in considerably better health now. You know, keep in mind when Social Security was passed, life expectancy was something like 62. And now it's pushing 80. And so people are living longer, they're working longer, which means that that's one of the reasons why Palm Beach County has so many snowbirds. Many of the snowbirds, you know, who are doctors or lawyers or business owners, continue to work at least part-time in their jobs up north, and they're spending part of the year here. So in places like Boca, at least 1/5 of the Jewish population maintains 2 homes, one here and one someplace up north, and many of them continue to work.
Do you have any idea how much does it, so when we talk about the total Jewish population of Boca Raton, what's the difference between the total Jewish population and well?
Oh, I think I know you're asking.
Yeah.
Of the 70,000 Jews in Boca Raton, about 13,000 are snowbirds. Mm-hmm. Okay? We didn't count the snowflakes. The people who were here for less than 3 months of the year we called snowflakes. When we ran into such people, we simply noted that, yes, this household is Jewish, and they say they're only here for a month or two. Mm-hmm. You know, even if they own property, someone who's here for 4 to 6 weeks of the year, you know, or just kind of comes in on weekends or something like that, is so much less a part of the community than someone who's here for at least 3 months, that we have a separate, there's a few thousand of those. They're not an enormous group, but we didn't count those people who kind of fled in and out in the 70,000.
Say a little bit about their voting behavior. I guess most of these Jews are primary residents. And
yeah, right, and you know, it's very interesting to look at voting here in the United States and the Electoral College. Now, as we know, we've now had 2 elections in recent years where the winner of the popular vote didn't win, right, the election. And it's interesting.
Or didn't win.
Did not win, right? Yeah.
The winner of the popular vote
did not win the election. Yeah. we have asked in Palm Beach County, what is the major reason you moved to Palm Beach County? And not surprisingly, the weather comes out as number one. I have friends or relatives who moved here, right, is number two. Nobody said I moved to Florida because there are a lot of electoral votes, okay? But that's what's happened. You know, when you take a look, right, if you went back to 1940, something like 40% of Jews lived in New York State alone, okay? And Jews have now spread out. They've gone to California and Florida, which are states with lots of electoral votes. And Jews are not that large a percentage of the state of Florida as a whole. I mean, there's 700,000 out of 21 million, right, people in the state of Florida. But of course, most elections are won by 1 or 2 or 3 percentage points. So, you know, the Jewish vote is capable of changing who gets those electoral votes. Now, while Jews are not a large percentage of the state, the polls that we've had, and we've done this in Boca, 95% of Jews claim to be registered to vote. Now, depending on which of the polls of the general population you believe in, it's somewhere between 65 and 75% of the general population is registered to vote, and it's 95% of Jews are registered to vote. Not only that, when you ask people if they voted in the last election, the American National Election Study puts the percentage of Jews who voted in the last election at 96%. And then when you figure that here,
what's the general?
as opposed to the general population, you get half of the people voting, okay, of those who are registered. For Jews, it's 96%. So Jews register and they vote in larger numbers. And even though there are only 700,000 Jews, something like 80% of them are 18 and over, which is much higher than the general population. So that Jews may make up as much as 5% of the electorate in the state of Florida. Now, Jews also tend to be overwhelmingly Democrats rather than Republicans, okay? The most recent data, by the way, on the percentage of Jews who voted for Trump in the last election, done by SSRS, which is the CNN polling firm. Full disclosure here, I work with them, okay, on my Jewish studies. They're the ones doing the calling for me as of about 3 or 4 years ago, okay? Only 18% of Jews voted for Trump, and something like nationwide, about 25% of Jews are Republicans. Here in South Florida, this is mostly Democrat world in terms of the political party to which most Jews subscribe. And so, the influence of the Jewish community on the presidential election in particular is significant.
Mm-hmm. The Republican Jewish Committee has often talked about the increasing importance of the Republican Party and encouraging more Jews to vote Republican. Do you see that happening?
No. In fact, it's the Republican Jewish Coalition. Coalition. And, I've been to their website, and I got them to take down the statement that says more Jews are becoming Republican. Because, in fact, the latest data that we have on the percentage of Jews who are Republican and the percentage who are Democrat is from 2013. And we're able to compare that with data from the year 2000. Both of the studies that I'm talking about cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million, so they're very good studies. The percentage of Jews nationwide claiming to be Republicans was down by 1 percentage point, and the percentage of Jews claiming to be Democrat was up by 2 percentage points. Now, I teach a course on survey research. A 1 or 2 percentage point change doesn't mean there's a change, right? There's a margin of error in a survey. So, but really what it says is there's no significant change. Okay, what is happening is that more and more Jews, like more and more Americans, are declaring themselves as independent and don't belong to either political party.
Do you have any idea how many that would be, or just?
Republicans are about 25% of Jews. Democrats are about 57%. The rest are independent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I guess this question allows you to address the issue of Orthodox Jews. We all hear, of course, that Orthodox Jews are more likely to be Republican than
That is true.
non-Orthodox Jews.
That is absolutely true.
Oh, sorry, don't worry about it.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. That the Orthodox do tend to be more Republican than the Democrats, than the non-Orthodox do. But keep in mind that nationwide, the Orthodox are only about 10% of the Jewish population, and that's been the case, by the way, since 1971. We have national surveys in 1971, 1990, 2000, and 2013. The percentage of Jews who think of themselves as being Orthodox has been between 8 and 10% that entire time. Here in Boca Raton, 4% of the community is Orthodox.
Only 4%?
Only 4%.
Does that include the city and the
Yeah. When we're
township?
talking about Boca Raton here, we're talking about everything out to the Everglades. Yeah, we have no data for the city itself. In part because on a telephone survey, 98% of people know their zip code. Okay, so you can ask them their zip code, right? If you ask them if they live in Boca Raton, many people who don't actually live in the city limits will tell you they live in Boca Raton because their mailing address is Boca, right? But they don't live in the city. So we have no data on the actual city of Boca Raton itself. This is all everything from the water to the Everglades, right? South of Delray Beach. But it's only 4% in Boca Raton are Orthodox. Now, what is true is there are more Orthodox Jews here than there were, 10 and 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Okay? But the percentage really hasn't changed any because the Jewish population has just kept growing. So it's 4% of a larger number means there's more Orthodox Jews. But it's still, the Orthodox are not a big part of the Jewish population. But to get back to the voting issue, okay, yes, nationwide, although more Orthodox Jews are Republican than non-Orthodox Jews, the majority of Orthodox Jews are still Democrats nationwide. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is here, because while we asked Democrat and Republican in Boca Raton, the Orthodox were only 4% of the sample. And consequently, I can't tell you what percentage of Orthodox Jews are Republican with any degree of accuracy, because we don't have enough interviews for that. Okay.
And you're speaking as someone who's done surveys of the American Jewish population as a whole.
Right. And I've published, by the way, a couple of significant pieces on the Jewish vote as well. Okay.
And since you mentioned that, why don't you tell our viewers where they can find your studies?
Oh, well, all of the studies, if you're into, are available at a website, jewishdatabank.org. jewishdatabank.org. Okay. So, for example, for South Palm Beach County, you'll find a main report that is over 900 pages that no one except me has ever read, I'm sure. Okay. But if you're a rabbi, let's say, interested in whether people are going to a Seder or not, or you're a Jewish family service interested in what percentage of people in Boca Raton need home health care, all the details of the study are there. Then we have a summary report, which I'm holding right here, which is, today it's about 150 pages.
This is the camera, yes.
Yeah, it's about 150 pages. And this has a summary of the summary in here and lots of pretty bar charts and pie charts, et cetera, to help you understand the data. And then there's, I think it's about 800 pretty slides as well that most people go to, because most people have an easier time with a bar chart than they do with a table with numbers in it. Bar charts are visual, so you can see it. So all of the data from these studies is readily available, and open to the public. On that same website are all the studies I've done and all the studies that others have done. Okay, so if you're from Philadelphia and you want to see the latest study of Jews in Philadelphia, it's available at jewishdatabank.org as well.
Do you have any other interesting facts about Boca Raton that you could?
Yeah, let me just give you, because we have a separate couple of pages in here. There's a lot more findings about Boca Raton, but I took some of the key ones here. We've got 77,000 Jews in Boca. I think we've We've said that already.
No, but that's just the city. That is just
No, nothing is just the city. Everything is from the
everybody.
water to the Everglades.
Oh, yes, okay, I understand.
Right,
It's 200,000 is the general population of West Boca, but that's not the
Okay.
Jews.
No, that's not the Jewish population, right? So looking at Boca, if we went back to 1970, there were 1,000 Jews. And by 1980, there was 17,000 Jews. And by 1995, there was 60,000. And by 1999, 69,000, and today, 77,000, okay? It's 4% Orthodox. 31% of Jews think of themselves as conservative. 37% as Reform. And 27% say, hey, I'm just Jewish. Now, half the Jewish population in Boca is age 65 and over, okay? But there are still 10,000 children here. The percentage of children is only 13%, which is very low for a Jewish community. But that's still 10,000 children. And we need to keep that in mind. You know, when the community sets its priorities, you say, gee, it's only 13% kids. Do we really need services for kids? Well, yeah, that's 10,000 kids. It's still a lot of children. You know, another really interesting thing that sets this place apart from just about anywhere else, 1% of our respondents were born in Palm Beach County. Think about that. 1% of the adults were born in Palm Beach County. That's it. And that means that a lot of people don't have long-term ties to this area. I remember when my aunt moved here, that she preceded my parents in moving here. And she said she was going home for Passover. And I said, Aunt Essie, you've been here for 12 years now. Isn't this home yet? Well, I like it here, but, you know, home is still New York. And that type of thing impacts giving to synagogues, for example. Okay? You know, we in Delray Beach, they just closed one of the main conservative synagogues because they didn't have enough membership left. You know, when it's not the synagogue people grew up in. It's not the synagogue their kids were bar mitzvahed in. They're much less likely to be supportive of it.
Rooted.
Yeah. You know, we do find such things as 80% of the Jews here participate in the Passover Seder. You know, 22% are always or usually lighting Sabbath candles. We get 36% belonging to a synagogue. That today is about what it is in America, okay? But only 21% are members of a synagogue here. So there's another 15% who are members of a synagogue up north and are not members here. So there's still a lot of people still maintain those contacts with the north. And 29% of households participated in something at the JCC in the past year. Now that's actually relatively low among Jewish communities, but it does show the success of the campus in Boca. I mean, having done 52 studies in probably 40 different Jewish communities, this is one of the most successful JCCs out there in terms of programming, not in terms of getting people to join, right? People, when you live in a JCC, right, where all your neighbors are Jewish, you don't tend to join one. You know, if you go to a place like Charlotte, North Carolina, and you want to see another Jew, you have to go to the JCC, and there actually both of the synagogues in town are located on the JCC property. Mm-hmm. You live in most condominiums here in Boca Raton and much of South Florida. You want to see another Jew, just pull up your blinds and look outside, right? So in small places where Jews are 1 or 2% of the population, for things like socialization, right, with other Jews, you have to go to a Jewish site. Here you don't. So we do get low levels of membership and participation for that reason. But still, no matter how you look at it, that campus in Boca Raton is very, very successful. Another factor is that this is a very Israel-oriented community. 60% of our households have visited Israel, okay? And over 90% say that they're attached to Israel.
How does that compare to the American
Very
Jewish
high,
community as a whole?
very high, okay? Second highest on both of those after Miami, okay? So this is a very, very Israel-oriented community. And the percentage of charities, of people who donate to Jewish charities and the Federation is also pretty significant as well, okay? So this is a pretty well-connected community to Israel. Less so to this particular piece of real estate that we call Boca Raton, because it's not where they grew up. And for many, it's not where they're raising a family either. I mean, we only had 10% of the households contain children. Okay, that's usually in most Jewish...
2005?
Yeah. The percentage of households containing children is usually about a third. And this is 10% because it's an elderly retirement community. And in that sense, this is a very different place than the other Jewish communities in the country for which we have data like this. There's data like this on probably about 70 or 80 communities. I've done more of these studies than all the other researchers combined. Okay, so I know the data pretty well as a result of that. I've been doing this since 1982, this type of work. Yeah.
By the way, in terms of how rooted people here, one of the things I once thought of looking at is, do you intend to be buried in South Florida? Do you intend to go back to up north to be buried?
It's really interesting that you should mention that. A lot of the bodies are shipped up north. We just went for my wife's uncle's funeral. He was just about to turn 90, okay? And we flew to New York and back in one day for that. And his burial plot is there. On the other hand, my parents, when the time came, realized they just gave their burial plots in New York to charity. They realized that the center of the family is in fact now here. And so they're buried in Delray Beach rather than up in Brooklyn, which is where I think they had their original sites. But I once did a study with one of my graduate students on what happens to the remains of people in Florida by county. And sure enough, along the coastal counties, and this was both Jews and non-Jews, it's state data, a very high percentage of bodies are flown back up north when people die here. Okay, yet we do have, I think, an increasing percentage who are being buried here in Florida as people begin to realize that this is the center of their family now, you know. Another thing that's happened as a result of Jews moving to South Florida to retire is we've separated grandparents from grandchildren with hundreds and hundreds of miles. The loss of that influence of the grandparents on, let's say, a weekly basis that I know I used to see my grandparents probably at least a couple times a month, right? Now it's, you see them very occasionally. Of course, when I was growing up, we did not have Skype or FaceTime, right? Okay, so that's somewhat helpful. But it's still a very big difference, and it's a big difference Jewishly, because grandparents are generally good role models Jewishly. It's also just in general, in terms of the problems of raising kids today and not having grandchildren. Grandparents locally. I mean, we were thrilled when my son and his wife decided to move 1.5 miles from us. And we now have a granddaughter and can visit her, as frequently as we would want to, but I don't want to be there every day. They have to have their space. But I remember giving a paper on this at a geography convention. It was on a session on Jewish geography. And there were 3 Israelis in the audience who were just from Israel, they weren't American Israelis, who were just amazed that, in the American Jewish community, that we've separated the generations by having people retire in Florida and the kids and the grandchildren remaining in New York. And while, this is what's going to happen, and I mean, when my parents did that, I preceded them here, right? But they would have had to move for health reasons anyway to come to Florida. But it is not a healthy thing, I think, to separate families by that much. When I was really small, my aunt and uncle lived on the same block with us, as did my grandparents. I'm not sure that was quite as healthy. It was totally healthy to be that close either, okay? Mm-hmm. But the idea that we're 1,300, 1,700 miles away between grandparents and grandchildren is also probably not the best.
But I've heard of more grandchildren moving down or relocating to Florida to be close to their parents.
Well, in fact, the University of Miami used to benefit from that in a significant way. You know, we used to get a lot of Jewish kids from New York where the grandparents lived on Miami Beach, and you know, the parents sending their kids down here would think, well, grandma and grandpa will, you know, watch over them some for us, and that's probably did happen, but probably not as much as the parents thought it would happen. Yeah, but clearly one of the things that's happened is that we get younger people, like, you know, in the doctors category at a minimum, right, who move down here and they're taking care of the large elderly population. Sure.
So let's go back. Oh, first of all, I don't think I heard you say the most important statistic: the population density, the Jewish population density of Palm Beach County compared to New York or other parts of the country.
Well, Boca, Raton, Delray Beach, I know is half the households we run into are Jewish. And if you give me just a second, okay, I don't have all of this memorized. Wait, I need volume 1. You'll cut this part out, I'm sure. Okay. Okay. But we do have population densities here.
I think it was 16% or
half are Jewish. Yeah, yeah.
Not just half, but how it compares to New York City. That this is actually more the Jewish population density here is actually more than New York City.
The 40, actually it's 49% of households in South Palm Beach County are Jewish. New York, it's 15%. Yeah, it's a big difference. Now that by New York there, it's the 5 boroughs, Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester. You go to Brooklyn, it's probably close to what Boca is, if not higher, okay? But New York, we always quote statistics for Jewish Federation service areas. That's why we have separate data for South Palm Beach, which is covered by the Federation in Boca, from West Palm Beach, which is covered by the Federation up on Okeechobee Road near Century Village, right? So that's why we have 2 sets of figures. So the New York Federation covers an 8 zip code area, and that 8 zip code area, about 15% of households contain a Jew versus almost 50% here. So yeah, this is a unique place in the United States in terms of the percentage Jewish. Now, let me just see here for just a second. In West Palm Beach, you're looking at 17% Jewish. So that's between Boynton Beach and the Martin County line is 17% Jewish. But the southern 2 communities, Boca Raton and Delray Beach, combined are 49% Jewish.
You list the zip codes in your study.
Right.
I don't know if you want to look that up, but what are the zip codes in Boca Raton that have the most Jews? Because one of the things I've noticed is that the Jewish population is more concentrated more in the West Boca rather than East Boca.
Right.
Is that something?
Yeah, we have a map, and I'll give you the map, and they can slice it in here. But zip code, the zip code with the most Jewish households in South Palm Beach is 33484 in Delray, which has 25,000 Jews in one zip code. Okay, you know, that's more Jews than there are in all of Cincinnati. Think about that. The second most important zip code is 33446 in Delray, which has also about 25,000. Then we go to 33434, which is in
Century Village.
Yeah, which is Central Boca, 15,000. 33433, also Central Boca, which is 17,000. 33496, which is 13,000. And 33428, which is 12,000. So yeah, it's amazing to see more Jews in one zip code in a place like Boca Raton and Delray Beach than there are in major American cities. That's how densely Jewish this area is. And that also shows in the institutional structure in terms of the number of synagogues that exist, the significant Jewish community campus that exists, the number of kosher and Jewish-style restaurants. The percentage of Jews here who keep kosher is relatively low. But the percentage of people who, when they go out to eat, want a good pastrami sandwich is relatively high, okay? And, so places like 3G's in Delray Beach, where I just was a couple of weeks ago, okay, just packed with people who, in talking to them, et cetera, you know are Jewish, okay? And we find lots of restaurants here that fit that concept.
Let's talk about Boca Raton specifically and your memories of visiting Boca Raton. You've been here since 1977. What changes have you seen physically?
The first time I came to Boca to do anything with the Jewish community was, it was probably in about 1986. And Bruce Warshall was the executive director of the Federation at the time. We
interviewed him.
Yeah, and the Federation was on the second floor in a strip shopping center, There were many, many fewer synagogues, many, many fewer Jews, the occasional restaurant. My parents lived here by then, so I knew the area some,
Where were they living exactly? What streets?
My parents?
Yeah.
In Palm Greens development, there was a place called Lucinda Palm Court, but no one's ever heard of that. It's got 12 houses on it. But you can just north of Atlantic Avenue in Delray Beach. I mean, Atlantic Avenue and Delray Beach on both north and south is just filled with lots and lots of Jewish households. And so there's been really a major change. But it's not just that. When you look at the attractiveness of an area here, Jewishly, you can live in Boca Raton and partake in things that happen at a synagogue, let's say, in Broward, or even in West Palm Beach. Somebody has in Alan Dershowitz to speak, and it's still not that far to go. And so when you're looking at the infrastructure of the Jewish community, you really need to look at a wider area than just Boca Raton. I'm the editor of the American Jewish Yearbook, along with Ira Sheskin at the University of Connecticut. And we realized, after doing the yearbook for 4 years, I said, Arnie, I just realized what we're doing in the yearbook. We're really kind of documenting the strength of the American Jewish community in 3 ways. First of all, in terms of numbers. I mean, there are now, believe it or not, about 6.7, 6.8 million Jews in this country. Okay? And we document how many Jews live where. Then we also document the infrastructure of the Jewish community. We have hundreds of pages of Jewish organizations, names and descriptions, and all the Jewish federations and all the JCCs in the country, and all of the Jewish newspapers listed, et cetera. There's an incredible infrastructure out there to support and cater to this 6.7 million people. And then we have sections on Jews this year who've won Nobel Prizes or Emmys or Oscars or Pulitzers or whatever, and to show that this population of Jews, which is 2% of the United States, it may be 50% of Boca del Rey, but it's 2% of the United States. Just what an incredible contribution this group has made to American society. And I think that's an important part of the story. We in the Jewish community must be doing something right? And a strong Jewish community, I think, means a strong America. And that's why I think it's important to have a strong American Jewish community. And the Jewish community here, while it's not all that religious a Jewish community in the sense that you don't have large percentages belonging to a synagogue and going to services, etc., they feel it in their heart. They're Jewish. They may be Jewish more in an ethnic sense than they are in a religious sense, but they're clearly Jewish, proud of it, and contributing in significant ways. I mean, you look at that the 3,000 households that we interviewed in Palm Beach County, selected at random, more than 95% did something Jewish last year. They either went to a service, or they joined something, or they lit Hanukkah candles, right? Or they donated to a Jewish charity. They did something to express the fact that they're part of the Jewish community. 95%. That really is a pretty amazing number. And this is just a different place here, and a very strong Jewish community in lots of ways.
I want to ask a couple more questions before we wrap up. Boca Raton and Palm Beach County in general used to be known as a place that was not hospitable to Jews.
Yeah.
Was fairly restricted.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that, and what's your knowledge as a
well,
history and how it changed?
Yeah, in Delray Beach in particular, right, was kind of the heart of what today we would call the alt-right, perhaps, right? Maybe that's the right term for it, right? And yeah, you Jews could not move into different parts of the county. I mean, the town of Palm Beach was the same way. And now the town of Palm Beach is a very high percentage Jewish. Clearly this has changed over the years, and Jews are an accepted part of American society today. In fact, a survey was done of religion in America called Faith Matters, okay? And a large random sample of Americans was asked to rate each religious group on what they call a thermometer scale. A 0 means you hate them, and 100 means you love them. Guess which religious group came out on top? Jews. Okay.
This is a survey of all Americans.
All Americans, right, of all religions. Right? And I'm sure most Jews voted that they like Jews, okay? And most Catholics voted they like Catholics, but Catholics could also vote they like Jews. And Jews, even though only 2% of the population was voting their self-identification, Jews led. Jews are accepted within American society today. Much, but not all of this discrimination has gone away. You take a look, I mean, I can remember a time when there were quotas for getting into Harvard, right, and Yale, and those types of things are gone today. It doesn't mean there's no anti-Semitism. There clearly is. I mean, you can go on the internet and get really, really scared about things. We can see some guy running against Dianne Feinstein in California right now, right, who's a clear anti-Semite, thinks Jews control the world, et cetera, et cetera. He's got a pretty reasonable percentage of people saying they're going to vote for him. Okay, so it's not like there isn't anti-Semitism out there, but on the whole, it's not like it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Okay, and I'm not sure that there may be places today where Jews simply don't live, they've never lived, and they may or may not be so welcome. Okay, but you certainly don't see leases that say you can't rent the place to a Jew or something like that, right? So I think it's different today than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
In terms of the future, do you see a change in the pattern of people from the Northeast moving to Palm Beach County or Boca?
Well, there's a couple of things going on here, because the big question is over time, what's likely to happen to the Jewish population in Palm Beach County? Well, let's look at Miami, which at one point had 250,000 and is now at 113,000. Let's look at Broward County, which over a 20-year period lost over 90,000 Jews. My suspicion is that at some point in the future that starts to happen here to some extent. And certainly the growth has to slow down. And here's why. When people move in when they're 65, they're going to be here on the whole about 20 years, aren't they? Okay. So when the Jewish population of this place started to take off in the 80s, and people moved in at the age of 65, by 20 years later, most of that population was beginning to die off. And even though more retirees were coming in, they were simply replacing the ones lost to mortality. Okay? And that's probably what's happening by now. I mean, Boca Raton itself is pretty well built out. There's not a lot of really empty land on which major new housing is going up, like there was in the 80s and in the 90s. So you're seeing the death now of almost everybody who came in the 80s and many who came in the 90s. And you do see new retirees moving in, but they're simply replacing the ones who are dying off.
Do you see a tendency of Jewish retirees to move to places other than South Florida? Is there any information on that?
Well, the first thing is that 95% of Americans today age in place, it's called. So they're living in the same house at age 70 that they were living in at age 65. The reason we in Florida think that everybody when they come 65 moves is because the ones who do move often move to Florida. We are seeing some change in that we are finding Jews in the Northeast, let's say, moving to places like the Carolinas to retire, or Atlanta, right? Places like that. But here's on the other hand. The vast majority of people retiring are still coming to Florida. And because the baby boomers are now in the process of retiring, the pool of retirees is actually larger than it was 20 years ago. So that even though, let's say, we've gone from 90% coming to Florida to, let's say, 85% coming to Florida, there's still more people coming to Florida because the pool of people retiring at this moment, because the baby boomers have been retiring now for about 7 years, okay, the pool of people is larger, and consequently, I would suspect that we will continue to get significant numbers of Jewish retirees here in Florida.
Well, Professor Sheskin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's
My
been
pleasure.
delightful to talk to you.
My pleasure.